welcome to Matt's Garage. Well, today I'm going to be servicing the transmission on this 2003 PT Cruiser. This is a turbo model. It's actually a Dream Cruiser, but it's going to be basically the same procedure for a non-turbo model. Only difference is going to be the part number on the transmission filter. I'm also going to show you how you can flush your transmission at home with no special equipment. That's going to allow you to change all your fluid, because normally if you just drain the pan, you're only going to get half the fluid out. The other half is trapped up in the torque converter, so you have to pump that out, and I'm going to show you how to safely do that so that you don't damage your transmission. Now, to start with, I want to dispel the myth that you shouldn't change your transmission fluid, because I've heard a lot of people say that if it's burnt, which this is, I'll show you. You can see it's quite brown there. There's no red in it at all anymore. It's way overdue. And so I've heard people say that when they're like this, you should leave them go, that the grit and stuff in the fluid is what's keeping the clutches going. But that's not quite how transmissions work. They actually have hundreds of little rubber seals in there that seal up and trap fluid in certain areas of the transmission to pressure up clutch packs and stuff, and it acts as a lubricant to the clutches. And you know, they design it in a certain viscosity for a reason. It's a certain thickness and has a certain lubricating ability, and when it's broken down like this, it's no longer performing to that spec, so that's why you need to change it out. Where people have come up with that myth is basically from quick lubes that hook up a pressure flusher to your car, and they'll just pump in the new ATF and basically displace the old stuff, and in doing so they end up pulling a lot of junk and debris out of the pan. They never pull the pan off and clean it out and change the filter. They just flush that all through, and they pull all that junk up through your transmission, and normally about a week later your transmission will start slipping and fail. So that's where that comes from. I have worked in a reputable transmission shop before for about a year, and we practiced this, and we never had a problem. We never had a customer come back like a week later after we flushed their transmission and say it was slipping or anything like that. If you do it properly, that's not going to happen. The transmission will actually perform better with new fresh fluid in it. Always make sure that no matter what car you're working on, you use the correct approved transmission fluid. This is very important, because there's different friction modifiers and such in different fluids, and I can promise you that if you use the wrong fluid, you will likely ruin your transmission. I've heard of several stories where that's happened. It's not something where they're just trying to sell you expensive fluid or anything. It's a very serious matter. So this vehicle calls for ATF plus 4, and I went straight to the dealer and got the correct Mopar stuff. There are other brands that offer an equivalent ATF plus 4, but it's not something I like to take a chance with. So in doing the flush, you're going to require more fluid. If you were just doing service, you'd need about 5 liters of fluid, or say 6 quarts to be safe. And if you're doing a full flush like this, I've actually prepared 10 liters. I've got 2 of these jugs, and I probably won't need quite all of that. Probably take about 8.5, but it's good to have a little bit extra, especially when you're doing the flush. You don't want to have to stop before you've completely flushed it out, that's for sure. You're better off to flush it more than less. Okay guys, you can see I've got it all securely jacked up. I actually jacked up both sides here. You can see I like to jack under the control arm mount there. I actually put my jack right on the bolt head and jack under that. Just make sure you don't jack or block under the torque boxes. You can see how that's all dented in there. That's from somebody putting a hoist or a jack in the wrong place and jacking under that area. So make sure you don't make that mistake. You can jack under the pinch weld where I have my blocks there, or you can jack right here where I have my jack. You see there's a big bolt there, and there's another big bolt right where my jack is there. See over here, same thing. Somebody jacked in the wrong spot. Quite a shame. Okay, so this is the transmission pan here, and it's actually it's held on with 10mm bolts, and it's also held on and sealed with RTV silicone. So once you take all the bolts out, you'll have to pry the actual pan down still. Okay guys, it's quite a bit of cleanup just around the edge of the pan lip here, just to make sure that that's clean and can't contaminate into the transmission. Just gonna wet all around there with some Varsol, and then we'll give it a good scrub and then wipe it. Make sure you wear gloves to do this. Okay guys, now for the fun part, and I'm just gonna use my electric impact to zip those 10mm out. I would recommend hand tools for this, because if you strip out the aluminum, you're going to be in trouble, and if you get this thing going the wrong way, that's exactly what's going to happen. The only other thing I'll need is just a little pry bar just to break the silicone seal, the RTV around there. So those last two I just loosened there. We'll give it a little gentle persuasion. And when you do this, just make sure that whatever you're prying on the transmission is very solid. Don't pry on a thin aluminum lip or anything like that, because aluminum's pretty brittle and it doesn't take much to break off a flange or a lip. So we'll kind of wait for that to settle down, because the pan's angled this way and the fluid level sits above the pan. Okay, so I still got those last two bolts, so what you want to do is hold the pan up really firmly and get the last two bolts out. And then just careful how you lower the pan, because there's still going to be a bunch of ATF in it. And trust me, it's easy to slosh around because the silicone kind of breaks loose suddenly. And I'm actually going to let this drip out overnight, because it's evening here already, and it's way easier to get that silicone sealed back on there if it's really dripped out, because if you get any ATF running down on there, it'll beat off the silicone, and the silicone will not stick. It won't adhere. So the filter kind of clips in. It's got a couple of like push clips, and then it will have a rubber seal where it actually connects up into and sucks the fluid in. So you just kind of pull straight. Sometimes they take a bit of force. I got a little splash in the face, but I think the O-ring seal came off with it, but you got to check and make sure that there's no seal left up in there. Okay, so this is a real good example of how not to RTV your pan on. Way excessive amount of RTV there. I'm going to show you guys how to lay a proper bed of RTV on there to get a nice seal and not have all this intrusion into the pan. You can see they gooped it right onto the corner of the filter. Very, very unprofessional. There's that O-ring I was talking about that you got to make sure it comes off with the filter and isn't stuck up in the transmission, because if it is stuck up in the transmission, your new filter won't seat properly in there and seal, and then you'll have you can suck air there, and that would be very bad for your transmission. So I'm just gonna get a light on there and look, and so far it's looking good. I don't see any chips or flakes in there. I mean, there's always there's a little bit of metal on the magnet and stuff, and that's totally normal, because there's the clutch packs have steels that the clutches ride on, and those steels wear along with the clutches, so you're always going to have that. So there you go, there it is with there's no chips there. There's like a couple little flecks, but there's nothing of any real significance. I actually think the transmission's pretty healthy. This is encouraging to see. If you can just see those little gold flecks there, that's what you're looking for. If you see a whole stack of them in here, and if they're any bigger than those ones are pretty small, but when a transmission fails you get big flakes, even shavings sometimes in here. So now we're going to cut open the filter. So yeah, this is the best way to get these open, is just with a pair of these snips. And you can cut right across here. Then just take a pair of pliers and bend that back. Be careful you don't cut yourself, because this is pretty thin and it gets pretty sharp. There's like a double layer here, and you wanna look on both sides, like in between the layers. There are a few flakes of steel in there, and that's the thing. The pan's not the total indicator. It's a good idea to cut the filter open. And I'm not saying this one's toast. These are still very small flakes of steel in here, and to me they indicate pretty normal wear. In a failed transmission I've seen big shavings in here. So okay guys, now that we've inspected our filter and pan here, it's time to clean up our pan. So the magnet is always covered in metal. I just take some dirty old rags and get the worst of it off initially here. Yeah, and then I'll just set it aside. I'll give it a final wipe before I install it, of course. And you can just get the excess out of the pan. So there's our initial step on the pan there. It's looking pretty good. And then normally I just take a wire wheel and drill and knock all this silicone off here. Only takes a few seconds, but somebody just went crazy with the silicone here, so I'm going to go ahead and knock the worst of it off with the razor blade here first. And I mean, you can do the entire cleanup just with the razor blade. You can see works pretty well. But I find the wire wheel gets that final skin off there really quick and easy. When I worked in a transmission shop, I used to have to do this with often the customer in the waiting room waiting on me. So you find the quickest way to do it and get that customer back on the road. Just be careful that you don't catch the lip and violently fling the pan across the room. So there we go, that pan lip's nice and clean. And now, normally the bolts aren't a problem, but whoever put this on, you can see they just tightened it right up and oozed all that silicone out. So some of these I'll have to run over with the wire wheel a little bit too. So now we'll just take some Varsol basically and clean out the pan really good. We'll use clean towels here. I'll use one more dirty one as another preliminary step, and then I'll switch to nice fresh clean ones. Okay, so we got clean hands now, but our cardboard is far from clean, so get the outside as clean as the inside, and then you're not cross-contaminating when you're bolting it back on. One important step before you go getting the silicone on your pan and stuff. I'm just going to clean up these pan bolts a bit better. I've got all the silicone knocked off them, but take some Varsol to them. But first I'm going to count them. So I've already counted the holes on the pan, and there's 14. So I just want to make sure I didn't drop any in the drain pan or anything, because when you get your silicone on the pan there, you're kind of on the clock. And once you get it up there, you want to get all the bolts in before you tighten any of them. Because if you tighten one down and you don't have them all in, the holes might not line up. So we're going to count them. 1, 2, 13, 14. So there we go, they're all accounted for. Now I'm just going to actually kind of clean them like this in my hand. So the only thing we got left is to get under there and clean up the flange where the pan seals to the transmission. And for that we're actually going to use these plastic razor blades. You can get these on Amazon or whatever. They're kind of the ultimate for scraping aluminum gasket surfaces. Okay guys, here I am with my plastic razor blade, and we're just going to get this flange cleaned up. The silicone that the last person used is not very good, actually. It's not near as good as what I'm going to recommend you to use, which is the Permatex Ultra Black. And I mean, I have used a metal razor blade on surfaces like this. If you're careful, you can do that, but so you definitely don't want to use like a wire wheel or a prep pad or anything like that. We're going to come back and wipe this clean with solvent to make sure that there's no oil residue on it before we go ahead and put the new RTV against it. Okay, well, we got the entire surface all scraped, so we're just going to go around with paper towel now and clean all that. And you just want to make sure that you're kind of pushing outwards and not pushing debris up into the transmission. You want to wipe this edge here and make sure that there is no debris contaminating inside. And this is kind of a preliminary wipe to get all that silicone and debris off of there. And then we're going to go over it again with some Varsol on the rag to get the oil residue off. And then right as we're putting the pan up, we'll have a clean dry rag in our hand. And we'll just make sure there's places like right here where it trails down and it drips. And that's why I let it drip overnight, but it's still dripping down slowly. And if that trails onto the flange while you're putting the pan up there, then the silicone's not going to stick and you'll have a leak there. So right as you're putting the pan up, you want to come along, see how that drip just came down, and you'll just come and you'll wipe that real quick, and then you'll slam that pan up there, hold pressure on it while you put all the bolts in so that it's sealed right away. And if you do it that way, you won't get any leaks. Okay, another fresh shop towel. As I said, this will drip down again, and I'll go over it again. This is where your filter goes up in there and seals, and as I said, you want to make sure the O-ring doesn't stick up in there. And if it does stick up in there, get up in there with something plastic preferably, and just pull it out of there gently. I got the filter right here. It's a Wix 5893-4. I actually really like the Wix filters. I trust them at least as much as the OEM filters. And in fact, I've had troubles with the OEM filters actually clipping up there properly on these Chryslers, so I avoid them. These rubber gaskets I don't recommend using. I've had problems with them before. Even when you tighten them down just to the normal torque spec, I've had them crack, not just around the bolt holes, but all over the place and just flake out and leak everywhere. So the only rubber gaskets I like are the reusable kind that have like the metal core or whatever, and they're proper rubber. This is just cheap rubber cut out of a sheet, and it doesn't hold up to oil very well. Junk. So that's what holds the filter on, is those little push pin clips, whatever you want to call it, and then also that O-ring holds pretty tightly in there as well. Just always double check that your new filter doesn't have any manufacturing debris on it or in it. And this one looks really good, so we're going to pop it up in there. And you really got to use a lot of force to set these. You want to make sure that you've got them set in, because if this falls back down in the pan, it'll suck air and it can wreck your transmission. Okay, so just to aid in assembly, we're going to take a little bit of this fluid and run around the O-ring there, just so that O-ring slides up in there without catching it all. And then you line everything up and try to set it up there really squarely. And you'll have to hold some good pressure on it and then give it a good smack. And then another good smack over here. And then just make sure. Okay, so I think I've actually just got that one clip holding, and it's quite a tight fit. There, you can hear that really clipped in there. There, the O-ring went in. I'm just going to double check it with the light again here. You want to make sure that O-ring is all the way seated in there. Okay guys, we're going to be sealing the pan on with this Permatex Ultra Black. And it's designed, see, it says maximum oil resistance. That's why they have different colors of RTV silicone, like the orange is the high heat one. and the black one is the one for oil. So this is equivalent to what the manufacturer used originally to seal this pan on, and I've never personally had this fail on me. So we're just going to do a final wipe down on the pan because you want to make sure that there's not even a spot anywhere. And then we're going to stick that magnet back in there, and then we'll lay that silicone around there. I like to work with just my skin at this point because you can really feel if you got a piece of grit or whatever then. And one little piece of grit can kill a transmission. So just some final bit of Varsol. And we want to make sure that we're Varsoling all around the lip just so that we're not having any residual oil or silicone residue there that's going to prevent the new RTV from sticking. And then that magnet goes right there, and you can actually see a mark in the paint. I don't know if it shows on camera, but you can see it's been sitting there, but that's also what these two little dimples in the pan here indicate, that that's where the magnet goes. You see these 4 dimples here? They actually help support the filter to make sure it stays up there. And you don't want to put this here or something because it would end up being against the filter. It could cause problems. So make sure you're putting that in the right place. It goes right there. There's one final step you want to do before putting the RTV around the flange, or if you're using a gasket, it's going to be even more important that you do this, and that's checking to make sure your flange is all true. And if it's not, you want to just turn the pan upside down on a block of wood or whatever and use a hammer to straighten it up until it matches the straight edge. Often they'll get pushed up around the bolt holes, and you'll just go around and knock it down, and that'll help it seal a lot better. Okay, so how you use your tube of silicone is up to you, but myself, I don't use the tip. The tip for me is just to seal the tube. It doesn't matter if it's even or whatever. I'm just going to run a quick bead around here. Okay, so now what you want to do is just take your finger, make a nice bed of RTV on there nice and even, and this will prevent it from squeezing into the pan like you saw before when I took it apart. And this is quite a thick bed, but we're not going to tighten it down so much that it all completely oozes out either. So I like to do it on my shop stool, and then I can rotate it as I'm going. If you are going to have it thicker in any area, have it thicker on the outer edge so it oozes out, not in. Okay, so that should work nicely. So we're kind of going to get that set up right next to our transmission. We're going to do a quick final wipe, and then we're going to put it up there, and then this is non-stop until you get all those bolts snugged up. We're not going to quite tighten them down all the way. We'll come back in a few hours and snug them up finally. Although you can tighten it down, you know, when I worked in transmission shop, we'd just snug them down and send them out. So, but I like to let the bed sit in there and set up a bit, and then if you retighten it, it really seals up nice. So I'm going to use this little stubby ratchet to get the bolts snugged up. It's just perfect, and this way I don't over tighten them. So I'm just going to wipe this excess oil up, then I'll wipe it with Varsol, and then we'll probably have to do a quick little touch-up wipe as we put the pan on. Just make sure you have the pan oriented right so that you can just slide it up there really quick. Okay, so now it's show time. Get that up there. Try and nail it, like try and get it bang on where the holes are. Now I put pressure on it. This is why you need your bolts handy. Try and get this one finger tight so that it holds that edge of the pan up, because that's where the oil's going to come down first. And then you want to get up here. I'm not going to tighten these, but I'm going to snug them enough that it kind of holds the pan in place. And it will just keep that oil from coming, and then I'm going to try and bounce around so that we're getting it torqued up evenly. But don't overdo it on any of these yet, because as I said, if you get them all snugged down and you can't move the pan around at all, the last bolt might not go in. Might not line up. And if at any point you're doing this and you see oil dripping out of your seal area here, you're in trouble. You might as well start over. It's not going to seal. So I just keep going around until I have them kind of even. And these aren't real tight. That's why I go around after and I just give them another little bit just to make sure that none are going to rattle loose. Basically, by then the RTV's holding the pan. See guys, you can see it's pretty neat. Not a whole bunch coming out, and there'll be even less on the inside because, as I said, I always put the thicker edge to the outer edge so that I don't have a bunch oozing into the transmission. So as I said, we'll give that a couple hours to dry, then we'll snug up those bolts and then we can fill the pan. Okay, well this is the dipstick for the transmission, of course, and that's where you fill the transmission through the dipstick tube. There is no other fill hole, so just make sure that it's all clean around here before you pull this out, so you're not getting any dust and debris down in the transmission. Then have a clean funnel, and we're going to pour 5 liters of ATF plus 4 in there. Good to the last drop. Don't force these in if it's not going in. You haven't got it twisted right. Okay guys, so we're moving on with the transmission flush here. We actually have to remove the grill just to get at the transmission cooler. It's got an external cooler behind the grill here, and we just have to disconnect one of the feed lines to it. So it's 4 7mm fasteners to get the grill out. And then you just pull out the top, and you kind of pull out and up at the same time. You can see there's those little hooks in the bottom plus a couple little alignment tabs. And this right here is your transmission cooler, so there's actually a line right there that we can take off. And it looks like the clamp on the line there is 7mm. So basically that hose there we got to get off. There's not a lot of room to work here, but we got to get that off and join another hose to it. Then we can just run it down to a drain pan on the ground. And when we start the car and cycle the car through the gears, it'll spit out the old ATF here. This hose here should work for that. There we go. Looks like if I took the battery out I'd have more room to work, but I don't want to do that yet because I have to start the car still. Okay guys, we're going to start it up and hopefully it doesn't spray everywhere. I don't really have long enough hoses to get it where I want it, but yeah. We're just going to go until there's some air coming out. As soon as I see air, I stop. Okay, that was perfect. You could see how the air came out at the end there. Okay, so we've got our dirty fluid that we flushed out now. And what you want to do is put it back in. This is the empty jug that I just emptied the fresh fluid out. So we're going to put that back into here, see how full it's filled, and then we can take the other new jug I have and top off the transmission with that exact amount. And that should be close enough to test drive the vehicle and get an accurate reading when it's up to operating temperature. This only looks like about 3 liters maybe or something, but as I just finished putting another 2.5 liters in, I put exactly what came out back in, and so we're just going to do the same thing again, just flush out a couple more liters and then we'll top it up. There we go guys, it's looking pretty clean coming out of there, pretty much like fresh ATF, so that's what we're looking for. I think we got all the yucky stuff flushed out of it now. Now I just want to explain with this, you can actually connect to either line. but it's not going to make a difference because it only pumps out of one line. So I'm hooked into the feed line that feeds the top of the cooler, but it circulates straight back to there. So if you disconnect that bottom line, the only difference is it's going to come out of the cooler port instead of out of the line. So you could connect to either line. In theory, it's just easier to connect to the top one because you don't even have to connect anything to the cooler. Nothing will actually come out of it. You only really need this one hose. I put the other one here as a precaution because I wasn't totally sure which line was the feed line, but I did guess right, and so the upper line is the feed line. You just need a hose off the upper line into your drain pan, and that's it. You'll be good to go. Just make sure you don't start the car prior to doing the flush. Like, you fill your transmission up and everything, and then you do this flush before you run it after you fill the transmission. That way that fresh fluid is in the pan, and it pumps up into the torque converter, and it pushes the yucky fluid from the torque converter out and into your pan. So now I'm going to go ahead and dump that fluid into there, and then again I'll add that amount back into the transmission. I got to empty almost this whole jug in there now to finish filling up the transmission. I just left about half a liter in the jug because it's easier to add a bit more in if it's a bit low than it is to take it out if it's too high. So I'm just going to go ahead and take my flush lines off here now, and I'm just going to reconnect them from behind. I've got the battery out now, and that's actually my recommendation for doing this. It's a lot easier to access it from the back side here. Okay, so we'll get that reconnected up here. Just make sure that there's no dirt going in there, and then just snug that clamp back up, and you're done with your transmission flush. It's that easy. Just one hose. I just checked the transmission fluid. I brought the engine up to temperature, shifted through the gears, and just checked it sitting here. And what I was aiming for was cold full, and then I'd test drive it, check it again, and make sure it was up to the full when it was hot, the hot full. There's two markings on here. Make sure you check it hot and neutral preferably. You see there's the cold, there's the hot. So it's right here right now, and I want to bring it up to about here, you know, the lower part of the hot. Then I'll just test drive it and confirm. There we go. I just added another half a liter, so that should bring it up to where I want. Thanks a lot for watching Matt's Garage. Stay tuned for more PT Cruiser content, and have yourself a great day.